Welcome back to Episode 7, Season 2 of the Learning Curve Podcast with Edmonton Catholic Schools. Thank you for joining us again today, or for the very first time. Our guest for this episode is Matthew Johnson. He's an English teacher from Ann Arbor, Michigan. In his book, Flash Feedback, he introduces time-saving strategies for educators to combat burnout, providing practical solutions that enhance relationships, fuel motivation, and foster student ownership of learning. In today's conversation, we hope to engage you in some meaningful learning to help ease some of the challenges you may be facing with grading and assessment. Before we kick off, let's take a moment for prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Dear God, we seek your wisdom and guidance. Grant us the insight to prioritize the humanity of our students and foster an environment where each student feels valued. May the words in this podcast inspire fellow educators, and may we approach our classrooms with empathy and understanding. Bless us with patience and resilience on this journey of nurturing positive learning environments. In the spirit of growth and learning, we offer this prayer. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. In the spirit of learning and respect, we acknowledge that we are recording today on the traditional land of Treaty 6, the ancestral territory of Indigenous peoples. We pay tribute to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4 and the enduring contributions of the Indigenous communities to this land. With gratitude, we honor their wisdom and resilience. As a united community, let us engage with the diverse peoples who call this land home. May our interactions be guided by positivity, celebrating the richness of Indigenous cultures, and working towards reconciliation through respect, empathy, and collaboration. May our journey be marked by humility, compassion, and a shared commitment to truth and understanding. First, we'll have Jennifer's Learning Lab. She will explore the topic of the myth of learning styles and how we can move forward in education. Matthew Johnson will join us to share strategies from his book and illustrate how they can be implemented in the classroom. Tracy will lead a Mindset Matters segment on stereotype threat, focusing on the importance of teacher mindset and its impact on students' learning and assessment process. Allison will guide us through lit literature, featuring the book Digital Portfolios in the Classroom by Matt Renwick, delving into how it can help you and your students get started with portfolios. That's all for today. Let's jump right in.
Welcome to the Learning Lab, where we decode the brain's secrets of learning. Today, we're delving deep into a widely held belief in education that we should teach to students learning styles. We're on a mission for more success for more students, and sometimes that means challenging popular myths. I'm your host, Jennifer Espejo-Harasimiak, ready to take you on a synaptic saunter toward dissecting and dispelling the persistent myth of learning styles. The idea of learning styles, popularized in the 1970s and 80s, suggests that students learn best when taught through their preferred sensory channel, be it visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. It's an appealing concept, but there is a glaring absence of rigorous evidence that matching teaching styles with learning styles leads to better learning. Instead, neuroscience and psychology studies show that while students may prefer certain ways of learning, these preferences don't necessarily correlate with better learning outcomes. What's more, educators who adhere to the myth of learning styles often develop a rigid approach to teaching, neglecting individual differences in students and encouraging fixed mindsets. There's a real danger of abandoning methods that support multimodal active learning, which has been empirically supported time and time again to lead to improved learning. So why does this matter? As educators, we're committed to evidence-based practices. Let's leave behind the learning styles myth in favor of more effective, inclusive methods. Instead of categorizing students into different learning styles, research suggests we should focus on mixed modality teaching. This approach, which involves using a variety of teaching methods and materials, caters to the natural versatility and adaptability of the human brain. It's also important to emphasize active learning strategies. Research shows that methods involving active engagement, like problem solving, group discussion, and hands-on experiments, are more effective for learning than passive listening or reading, regardless of a student's preferred learning style. For more on active learning, listen to Season 2 of the Learning Curve ECSD podcast, Episode 7. Lastly, let's not forget the power of metacognition. Teaching students to understand and reflect on their learning process is crucial. It's about developing self-aware learners who can adapt their strategies to different contexts, a skill far more valuable than fitting into a predetermined learning style box. Listen to a more in-depth discussion on metacognition in Season 2 of the Learning Curve ECSD podcast, Episode 4. So educators, let's seize the opportunity to provide rich, diverse, and engaging learning experiences that cater to this complexity. This is how we achieve more success for more students. With that, dear listeners, let me leave you with one final point to ponder until our next episode. What diverse and inclusive strategies could you implement to enhance learning for all your students beyond the confines of learning styles? Let us know in the comments.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Learning Curve podcast with Edmonton Catholic Schools. Today our guest is Matthew Johnson. He is an English teacher from Ann Arbor, Michigan. His passion for education has led him to write about finding balance in the busyness that is teaching. His work has been published by Principal Leadership, Edutopia, ASCD, the National Writing Project, and the National Council of Teachers of English. Matthew also writes weekly blog posts that can be found on his website, www.matthewmjohnson.com. Welcome, Matthew.
Hi, it's great to be here.
So, could you tell us a bit about yourself and what led you to pursue a career in education?
Yeah, my teaching journey sort of began after my sophomore year of college. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so of all things, I went out and I actually took a gap year and I decided to be a ski instructor. And I wish I had like a profound reason for that, but it seemed cool. And like, I literally saw it in a movie and I'm like, that seems awesome. And when I got there, they're like, look, you're not a very good skier. I'm from Michigan. We don't have very big mountains. They're like, but you seem like you could be a good teacher, and we can teach you the skiing part. We're actually more concerned about that. So they put me with 4-year-olds, and I wasn't at the moment very happy with teaching 4-year-olds, sitting on the buddy slope. It wasn't exactly what I'd imagined. But one day there was a kid, and it actually ended up being delightful. I ended up loving the little ones and actually preferring to, do a lot of my lessons with them because they're just awesome. There was a lesson one day where this kid was he was about 13 and I was only 20 at the time. And his parents were like, he doesn't like skiing. We drag him year after year. It's going to be the last year we're going to do it. And he was there and he's like, I met him. He was like, yeah, I don't know, I don't know about this. And long story short, throughout the day, we kind of bonded. I eventually got him out on the hill and he started actually something clicked and he started to do it and like it. And he was like, hey, I think I actually kind of like this thing. Maybe I'll come back next year. And that night I was at home and I was like, if he comes back next year and they go a week every year, 52 years from now, if it becomes a weekly thing, that's a year of his life that's noticeably different because of an afternoon I spent. And that was the first time in my life that a light went off. And I was like, oh, I love that. That's, the impact you have there. And the idea of just waking up every day, trying to help people and kind of help them craft their lives just was a beautiful concept. And so that was it. I went back to school, I re-enrolled, and it was kind of, I've been a teacher ever since. And nothing, it was sort of this really awesome moment. And now I'm in my 16th year of teaching, and still loving it every bit as much as, that first year of teaching skiing.
Fantastic. You're probably pulling at the heartstrings of a lot of teachers here in Alberta with the Rocky Mountains being close by. I know a lot of us are fans of skiing, snowboarding, all those winter sports. And wonderful that you came to education through such a fun outlet to begin with. So could you speak a bit about your area of expertise currently in teaching?
Yeah. So I have been both a social studies and history teacher and English language arts teacher. I'm currently doing English language arts and academic intervention work. But a passion of mine over recent years, I'll talk more about this, has really become working with teachers in terms of feedback and assessment. And how I came to that area is that I just said that once I found teaching, it was it. I loved everything about the job. I love the students. I love waking up every day thinking about how to make people's lives better. I love the content. My colleagues, it was all great, except my first 3 years of teaching, I lived in California, and it was a block from the beach. I was paying a lot of money for a 200 square foot apartment just to be a block from the beach in California, but I wasn't at the beach. I was sitting there at my table like grading essay after essay after essay. And so after my third year of teaching, I had a kind of a crisis of what I don't want to be sitting at this table every evening, every Sunday, no fun day, which is what I called it. I want to be living a life. And like when I have a family, I want to be with them. And so I ended up leaving after my third year of teaching. And I did find my way back largely because that was right when the recession fell upon us in 2008. And I needed to pay off student loans and have a job, right, and kind of make ends meet. But, and that was when I really realized that feedback needed to be something that I needed to figure out, this responding to writing thing, because it was the only thing standing between me and really the perfect job for me. And so I started a grad program, and that became what I focused on, and it's kind of been a focus area ever since.
Wonderful. I think what you're speaking to right now is the current reality, at least in Alberta, that we're living in. We seem to have so many different initiatives, so many different ways that were directions that we're pulled into as teachers, and finding that efficiency and that time so that we're not having those Sunday no fun days is really important right now for teachers in our neck of the woods. So from all of your experiences working with teachers, what are some broad themes you've noticed in assessment and feedback?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting time to be focusing in on assessment and feedback because a lot has happened. There was in my book, Flash Feedback, I talk about how in 1982, Nancy Summers wrote this essay called Responding to Student Writing, where she talks about how there's like this unwritten canon, is what she calls it, of like that teachers basically act as editors. A paper or a project comes along, we mark everything that's wrong with it, every thought that goes through our head, we sort of make the whole thing. And she, in the essay, points out that this is not in line with the rest of what we do as teachers, that you can't ask somebody to learn 25 lessons simultaneously, that we don't just say something once, move on from it, and assume that the students have it in other contexts. And something I would add to that is also, then you're also not thinking about things like building relationships and motivation and student identity. And one of the things that's been exciting in recent years is that I think for a long time, like when I started writing Flash Feedback, which is a book I wrote on feedback 7 years ago, that I would still say that was, at least in the neck of the woods that I'm in, that was still just basically the norm for everybody. And I have seen a shift from that, which has been really fun. I feel like we're at a moment now where people are starting to recognize that feedback is the main one-on-one contact point between teacher and student. It's where students build their academic identity, because like oftentimes teachers have, or like so much of their identity, because teachers are like the only people responding to their writing and art and thinking a lot of the time. And it's also like a great place to build a relationship. And I feel like we're starting to understand that more, which has been very exciting. And assessment is very exciting. I know you all, for example, are experimenting with standards-based. There's contract-based grading. There's mastery. There's sort of and those, I think, especially with the pandemic, really started to get a lot of attention. So, more than anything, it's just kind of an exciting time for feedback and assessment, because I think for 100 years, we were kind of doing the exact same thing. And people are starting to now finally wonder, is there a better way to do this?
Excellent. So let's dive into your book, Flash Feedback. Can you give us a short overview of the book for people who may not have read it?
So the idea with the book is that once I started in my fourth year teaching, going into feedback, for a long time, it was just study for me. I did my grad program on that, my master's thesis on that. And then I just kept reading and writing and thinking about it. It was just for me. But more and more, I found that like a lot of teachers would come and ask me, and I would show them something and they would be like, oh, that was so helpful. And like that eventually led me to want to write a book where I just kind of took all of the things that I had learned about this and passed them along, because look, as teachers, we have too many things that we are asked to do and be experts in, motivation, classroom management, language instruction, choice reading. I mean, there's so much great thinking around all these things, and you just simply can't be an expert in all of them. So we need to have other people, my ideal of professional development is to get folks together, and different people have thought really deeply about different subjects. And I was like, I can do that with feedback, because I've been doing that for a long time. And I did get to a point where like I could write the book because I wasn't spending my nights and evenings responding to student work and assessing student work. Like that was just happening within the school day. And I wanted to pass that along. So, I mean, the core concepts of the book, one of the major ones is the idea of being an interested reader, not a detached authority, which basically means the detached authority is what Summers describes in that essay from 1982. You mark everything like you're an editor. And an interested reader is the idea that, no, you're a teacher, not an editor. That's different. And so because of that, you've got to think, what does this student need right now, and how can I best, provide that for them? And that's one of the major concepts. Another major concept is the idea that most feedback actually comes at the very end of the process, and students look at it once if they look at it at all. And what we know about learning is like, look, you don't learn something that you look at once and put it for a second and put aside. It just kind of disappears. And so I hear a lot of teachers who get really frustrated. Like, I write these comments on these papers, and I give them back, and then they do the same thing the next time. And look, I was there for a long time. That was part of my frustration in my early years. But like, part of that is the fact that like they're only looking at it once at like the end of a unit, like 2 weeks after the unit ended, right? It's like, that's not really a recipe for learning. So I talk a lot about the importance of having a feedback cycle where like if you have a piece of feedback that they keep revisiting it to encode that with, this is in line with retrieval practice, right? And the importance of reflection. And then I guess maybe kind of one other big thing that the book's named after is the idea of flash feedback, that we tend to think about feedback as being just a giant paper project that we put all the thoughts on. And flash feedback is the notion that, yes, you are going to have larger papers and projects that need response, but you should also, feedback is more effective when it's regular, and like that you can design things, either responses that you put on writing, either written or, typed, onto a Google Doc, or little mini conferences where you can respond to like one thing, in like a targeted way, and do that in like a minute or less. And I have a minute or less as kind of my threshold for that, because you can do that within the confines of a class period. I did that just this week. This week I was working with students on theme. And theme's hard for students, right, to kind of understand what that concept means. And so they did a thing where they were working on theme, they turned it into me, and then they had choice reading. And during choice reading, I took a look at that and kind of gave them feedback. And then we, talked about it afterwards. And they either had a 10-minute block to fix kind of some of the issues they had, or if they were all good, then they got to get an extra 10-minute block of reading. And that's kind of in line with like mastery based, right? You kind of keep tossing it back to them until they have it. And so those are some of the key core concepts. There are other things in the book like peer and, self-feedback and talking about, wise interventions. But we don't need to go too deeply into that right now. But
when I started my career, I was teaching French language arts in a junior high setting. So I definitely fell into those traps of being the editor instead of the teacher. And I'm correcting all the little things. The papers are marked up in red. And I wish back then I would have had your book to read, because that would have saved me painstaking hours. But also, I think for my students, if I had focused on conferencing and doing that flash feedback in the moment and really giving them the opportunity within a class period to implement feedback, I think our relationships also would have flourished.
Yeah, that is one of the most beautiful parts, is like kids love talking to teachers about their work. If they feel like the teachers are really listening to them and thinking about moving them forward, they actually genuinely love it, right? And some of the ones who have the most fraught relationships with the subjects and with writing or reading are actually the ones who often love it the most, because somebody's really hearing them. They're not just marking up all the grammar errors and tossing it back at them. And so,
I'm interested. Let's just go down this route to kind of illustrate what a class period could look like for teachers. So you're still currently teaching, as I said, you just taught this week. Could you walk us through what one block would look like for you as the teacher?
Sure. And, I'll do one that I did recently. So I teach mostly freshmen. I have a lot of students who have an intervention blocks as well that they're doing with me, who are embedded in my classes. So a lot, and some of those students, won't have any punctuation at all. And so we've been talking recently about, kind of punctuation and its role, that what it allows us to do is it allows somebody who's not with you right now to hear your voice, that it captures the pause and the cadence of your speech. It's not just something to do, it's that. And so we've been talking a lot about that. And so one of the things that I had them do this recently is we were talking about commas and how most commas fall into a few different concepts. And so what the students did is they just did a paper for me, and we hadn't really talked about commas on that. So I actually didn't really stress about commas on that. Part of how you can do the interested reader thing where you don't mark everything is you can plan that you'll do stuff later. So on their first story, we focused on big storytelling concepts. Do you have a theme, indirect characterization, description of things. And then what we did is that I said, okay, and I didn't mark any comma errors when I saw them because I knew this lesson was coming. And I said, okay, get your paper and let's talk about commas. And we did. And then they copied and pasted a page from it. And I said, look at your comma usage, based on what we just said. And I want you to go through and I want to make sure that every comma, that you're not doing the salt and pepper thing, where you're just shaking them on there, like no random commas, but also like you have them wherever there should be a comma. The moments when you're going to be pausing when you talk, after an introductory clause, in a list, we all pause in these moments. And they went through and they did that. And that was like, the first part of class. And then we had a reading assignment and they did the reading assignment. And during that, I went through and I just hit the find function. And with flash feedback, you can use like tech tools, or you could, kind of have ways to code it. So I hit Command F on my Mac, which is, we have something different for PC, but I don't know what that is. And I just hit comma and every comma on the page lights up. And I've already read this before, so I know kind of what it says. And I just scan and I'm like, are all the commas where they should be? And if they are, awesome. That's great. And I have a little saved comment. And so saved comments, I talk about this in the book. There's a lot of history that if you get too canned with your comments, where there's just kind of saved comment after saved comment, it can feel very detached. But they can be very useful for something like commas, because to explain what a comma splice is takes a while. I can have a saved comma that explains that and then kind of adapt it to the student. A certain student, I might say independent clause. Another student, maybe we're not there yet, so I'm going to talk around it a little bit. But I have a basic framework for that, right? And so I have 4 comments that are over here. One of them is just, you did it. Good job. You really have your commas down. And I'll just put that in. And I'm just using it for that one assignment. It doesn't feel overly canned. I might quickly adapt it for them. And then for the other students, if they have an issue where they have comma splices, I can put in the other one and I can say at the top, and I can say, okay, you have 2 comma splices. Go and find them. And this is very important that they do the work. I'm not playing editor, which actually takes less time. I just think you have 2. Go find them and fix them and then resubmit, and then you can get full credit. And so again, then they either got to choice read after that or they worked on that with me. And if they had a question, they could raise their hand and I could come by a micro conference with them, which is like having a short conference, not like a very long one. And the nice thing is that day where we talk about commas, they work on it a little bit. They do some reading while I take a look at it, and then I respond to them while they're doing that. And then we have they either are going to be fixing them, using my feedback, or we'll be conferencing. They learn more about commas from that day than an entire year's worth of me circling them in their papers. And I'm somebody, it's very hard for me to not circle the commas on a paper, but I that's how I deal with that inner editor, is I know that this is coming. And so I can kind of put that in. So does that answer the question? That's sort of an example of a recent thing we did. Take some of these ideas.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I love the idea of already having those few feedback comments ready, especially ones that that are typical misconceptions for students, like pre-writing them so that you're not inventing something new on the fly for every student. And then one purposeful lesson having more impact than spending hours of your own time, which may not have the impact for students.
Yeah, and they're doing the work, right? I'm not fixing it for them. I'm like, look, you have 2 comma splices. We talked about those. Find them and kind of change them. And then when it comes to when they turn it back in, I just hit the version history button in the corner, because we use Google, and it just lights up the changes they made. Did they make the 2 changes? They did. Good. Okay, they get credits. It's very fast, right? You can do that it took me no more than 20 minutes per class, and I have an average of 32 kids class.
That's wonderful. I'm hoping that our English teachers who are listening to this are feeling a bit of inspiration or hope that we can move in a world that's a bit easier on our time.
Yeah. And the nice thing is it's universal too, right? I find every teacher has their own kind of pressing feedback issues, right? And feedback concepts are very universal. They sort of apply to math, and, whether you're 2 or 102, they're pretty similar, which is cool.
Since writing flash feedback, have you seen teachers, have you witnessed any teachers implementing some of your ideas?
I have. It's really fun. I mean, actually, it's one of the funny things. So, books stay the same and you keep evolving, right? It's one of the weird things about being an author is there are a lot of things in flash feedback that I've moved past, right? The core concepts, I think, are all things I still very much, believe in and stand by. But what's, interesting is some of the more recent reviews, some of the people have been like, oh, I kind of know this stuff. And like, that actually makes me happy, like to get a 3-star review. There's a few of those out there. Most of them are 5, but like but most of them actually say that, like on Goodreads, of like, oh, I kind of knew that. And I'm like, oh, well, that's great, right? Like, it's nice that I feel like, and I don't think this is just me, right? I think that there are a lot of people in feedback and assessment who are talking about what it can do. But every once in a while, I'll run across somebody who's like, oh yeah, no, I'm doing more like micro conferencing in class. I'm like, oh, that was my turn for that. I'm sure somebody probably had it before me too. But like, you come across it, and that's really fun, right? It's nice, as I said at the beginning, that I do feel like there's a lot of traction on that, and to even be a very small part of that is really neat. And when you see, and I have had a lot of teachers who reach out to me and say, hey, like, it really helped me to realize that feedback can be not the worst part of the job, the thing I have to do kind of that I hate in this job I otherwise like, but it can actually be like one of the most fun parts of the job, the part where you build connections with students, where you really kind of work on individual growth, and that's really fun.
Excellent. So you have a YouTube video that I think you put it out last year in the fall, called Feedback Literacy.
Yeah.
And I've used this video lots in the presentations I've been giving to school sites and professional learning communities that I've been working with on feedback. And I'll link it in the description for our listeners. But can you walk us through what is feedback literacy, and how can we establish that within our classrooms?
Yeah, so this is something I didn't know when I wrote the book. We'll talk about books sort of you move on and they stay the same. I have elements of it in the book that I think I just kind of already sort of understood at some level, but to hear the word feedback literacy really put it in the context. And I heard this from, there was a web organization called Fluke that kind of allows students to connect, and they had a webinar. So I want to give them credit on that. And basically the concept is that most of the time we give them feedback and we don't teach them how to use it. And so there was a guy who was actually like a radio engineer. Like, he had nothing to do with education, and he wrote this one random paper where he's like, hey, and I think it was more general, but like it ended up working really well for educators, of like, no, we need to teach people how to use the feedback we give them and not just assume. And so the concept is really simple. It's just, students need to understand, kind of have a firm understanding of who they are as writers, or as, French students, or as scientists or mathematicians, or, singers first. They need, we have a hard time accepting feedback if we don't have sort of a kind of base level of comfort with sort of who we are and what we're doing. The second thing, though, is then to teach students, kind of like what feedback is. Here's why I'm giving this to you. And there's a really famous study that found that, it was from a Massachusetts middle school, that found that when they put a Post-it on these middle schoolers' essays when they got it back, in the teacher's handwriting, that said, I'm giving you this because I have high expectations and I know you can reach it, they did double the revision of the students who got a control that said, I'm giving you this feedback because or just like, here's some feedback, just something very neutral. And the researchers' theory was that, like, it just showed them that this feedback isn't for making you it isn't to punish you. It's not because I'm mad at you. It's not to show, it's actually because I have high expectations. And a lot of the students simply didn't understand that. They thought it was because the teacher didn't like them. And so just even being told what this is for. And then thirdly, like, making sure that you kind of sit down with those like students and you kind of help them do it. And that's where conferencing comes in. I talk in the video, I think, about conferencing and how, like, no matter how thoughtfully I word the feedback, there's still going to be a lot of misconceptions. So you got to sort of guide them through. So the idea being sort of, they have a sense of self first, a sense of what feedback is second, and then like they have you help guide them through the specific feedback that you get. You find some way to interact around it, because there's going to be misconceptions and points of confusion. It's just human nature. But yeah, it was something that I just, the second I saw it, I was like, oh my, everyone needs to know about this. And so I'm glad that the video was helpful of it.
Yeah, it was a light bulb moment for me. And as I've been working one-on-one and in small groups with teachers, whether we've watched your video or not, it always seems like a light bulb moment. We get to that point somewhere in our work where, why don't we talk to our students about what we're doing as teachers? Why we kind of forget that they need to understand the process the processes we're undertaking in the classroom.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing we often kind of get on them for. It's like they assume while they're writing an essay that we understand their thought process, right? And I think that we do the same thing right back to them.
Well, with that, So we've dabbled in what is flash feedback, the importance of feedback literacy in the classroom. But what if you were to give a definition for what is effective feedback?
Yeah. So I think it's actually pretty clear. Like, so what's interesting is that feedback in practice is very thorny and tricky, but in terms of like what works, it's pretty clear. Formative is much more effective than summative, right? If you get feedback and you can use it, you're going to internalize it much better. Also, having it not attached to assessment. The second there's assessment or grades, feedback loses every time because that's where the attention goes. You can kind of think about feedback as like a map to the future, and an assessment is like a static picture. And that, once you have the static picture, that starts to just get all the attention, not this map going forward. Having it be like regular is really important, and timely. Though what's interesting about timely is sometimes you actually want to delay a few days because of recall practice and how that can help you remember something. But again, it shouldn't be like 5 weeks later, and it often is if you got the massive stack of papers, right? That's not best practice there. And then one of the other kind of things that I think is really important that I talk about in the book, but I've gotten even more into, is just the idea that it's hard for all of us to accept feedback. And so as much as possible, starting in a neutral place, not an evaluative place, is really important. And then working your way towards how can I have success in the future? So that would be, instead of saying like, you need to have better understanding of paragraphs, which is evaluative. You could say, I notice there are no paragraphs here, which is true for a lot of my freshmen who come in. And like both sides look at it and we're like, yes, like that's neutral. Like there's clearly no paragraphs here. And then you're like, so generally you want to have paragraphs for this reason. And here are the places to do it. So go and try and do that yourself, where you give them a very specific kind of place to go in the future, and that we're much more open to that. And I just think lastly, human, that we just remember that we are two humans interacting, not like, I'm kind of correcting a paper. I feel like it almost like kind of becomes like an activity for us. Like, where are all the errors and how can we fix it? But remembering that this is a human being, we know this human being, and we're trying to build them up as a student and as a human and reader and writer and all the things. And keeping that in mind, I think is very important too.
I'd like to focus in on your last point there, but also your point of when you couple grades with feedback, the feedback gets lost. And when we think of the goal of education is to focus on learning and get students to learn how to learn and build them up in their skills. So we have a few teachers. We have about 12 teachers who are working in a PLC group right now with the school board. And they've been noticing that students are saying to them all the time, is this for marks? Is this for grades? Is this for marks? Is this for grades? So together we've been exploring this idea of going gradeless. And much like we were talking before the episode, it's more in the line of grading less rather than going completely gradeless, just because of the constraints of the systems we're working in. But you've gone this way for about 5 years. Can you comment to how this interacts with feedback?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I think the core concept is you want to separate feedback from assessment wherever possible. It's our feedback that we spend all that time on is going to mean significantly, like we're talking 2 or 3 times like less retention and understand, all the things, if it's connected with assessment. It always loses. And so how that looks, in my practice is, again, I'm in a school, it's a graded school. It's a graded district, right? We're talking like, 1, 0 through 100, A, B, C, D, or E kind of thing. And so I, as often as possible, just try and find ways to separate the two. I do have to give the grades per my contract, but something I do is, like I said, with the flash feedback, it's mastery based. I just keep tossing it back to them until they get an A, and don't really even talk about the grade. I just kind of keep like, oh, here are these 2 errors. Let's get it. Oh, look, you have it all right. And so, that kind of makes it more about learning this thing than like the grade. Or I will when it comes to my feedback, I give it in the middle of the process. And the way that I'm able to read it twice is the students self-assess at the end. And this would be, I think, a really important point, which is that students can be great at self-assessment. And but they have to be trained. They have to understand the rubric that they're working with. You got to spend some time actually norming it and really thinking about it. Those are all very important. But then they know exactly where they're at. And the rare occasions that they don't, how it looks like in my class is we make the rubric together. We could take the district one and we sort of make a student-friendly version one. We talk about it. We look at all the examples. And then they go through and they rate it. And it's a graded district, but I have them rate A, B, C, or D. So I'm basically doing a standard space thing, right? A 1, 2, 3, or 4. And they have to justify it. They have to explain each. And I find that once we've done the training and norming, 95% of them give exactly what I would give. Like, it's right in line. But look, I can't just give them a grade just because they say that's my grade, especially because if they all found out that's what I was doing, they would all just be like, A's all the time. Because look, I mean, that means something for colleges and stuff like that. And so if I have a disagreement, I just go over and talk to them. And I say, hey, you gave it this, but I noticed this. And most of the time what they'll be like, yeah, I just kind of gave it some A's. I'm like, well, how about you take it home? And like, here's the feedback I gave you, and we can add this to it. And then you'll have that grade you gave yourself. What do you think about that? And a lot of the time you can really get kids who are resistant to sort of doing work to actually really open up to it with an approach like that. So I found that and one nice thing is for me, the way when it comes to like actually putting the grade in, I've already read the thing once and I hit the version history button and I can see all the changes they've made. I can see all their justifications. And I just like, kind of like triangulate. Like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yep. And then you just put the grade in the grade book. Like, I'm spending 2 or 3 minutes doing that, which gives me time to give them formative feedback. Now, is that the only way to do it? No, right? You could like have them like, maybe you give a lot of feedback at the end, but you delay giving them the grade a day, or you have them predict what the grade is going to be. That's a different concept called delay the grade. That might work for teachers too. I think just as much as we can separate the two, that's really the key. Grades are corrosive for everything from motivation to, interest in learning what you're talking about, to, student identity a lot of the time, to relationships. And so I think as much as we can kind of mitigate that is ideal. It's not perfect, right? But, nothing's perfect. So, it's just, I think that if you have one core concept, it's like separate the grading and the feedback as much as possible. It will make the feedback more meaningful. It will make the class more about learning. And then kind of find ways where they can maybe be a part of the assessment, because then it feels less like it's being done to them.
Yeah, I love that. Separate feedback from grades, spend more time on feedback, less time on grades.
Yeah. And have them fill in that space, right? Because then it actually empowers them to understand what they're doing. They're not, a lot of, you can actually see in the terminology, they're like, what grade did I get? It's like, no. Like, like what grade is it? Right. It's like, it's even in the terminology that they're expecting me to sort of bestow the grade upon them. When we can break that, it actually grades have less of a hold because they kind of understand what it's about more.
Wonderful. Well, we're coming to the end of the episode, so we have about 3 more questions to go through. Quickly, could you give us 3 top tools or strategies for feedback?
Yeah. So I think student self-assessment, we just talked about it, is really, really important. I think feedback cycle, where anything you say, if you're going to take enough time to say it, I mean, even 5 minutes per student at the 150 students I have is like 10 hours, right? Have them use that a bunch of times, have them revisit it. When they set goals in the next unit, when they reflect, find ways. That's really important right there. And then the third thing is something called a pyramid of like response, or like pyramid of feedback, which is basically the idea that like feedback isn't just something on big papers. We should think about what we're doing. If it's like trying to focus in on commas, then maybe it's flash feedback. Sometimes if they're doing like a journal entry, we feel like we have to read it, but like maybe you don't even have to read that. Maybe it's better for them to experiment with new ideas and you just check off that they did it. That's okay. In fact, that's really good, because students should be writing like 30 to 60 minutes a day. And if you're reading all of that, like forget about it, right? So kind of, I think having an understanding, I talk about it more in the book, of like what they're doing and then how you should respond to it should follow that. Is probably the third thing. Because like there's a lot of time spent reading stuff we don't have to read, or responding to stuff we don't have to respond to, because we feel like we should be doing it, not because it's helping them.
Fantastic. Thank you. So are there any projects or initiatives that you're working on currently that you'd like to share with us?
One of the big things I love doing is just coming around to schools and, districts and talking to them. I'm a teacher in the classroom. I'm like full-time teacher in the classroom. So I don't do a ton of them, but I love doing that. And I've been spending a lot of time doing that the last few years, which is great, because I learn something from it every time. And it's it's always fun to be sitting there, like working with teachers, trying to help them get a handle on it. I did just finish a course, online course on better, faster feedback that takes everything from the book, but then all the things I've learned in like the 4 years since, which has been really exciting. That's been a lot of fun. And then I'm also finishing up a book right now on grammar and language instruction, which is like the other kind of core passion of mine. So that's something that it's to be coming, but I'm excited for.
Wonderful. So that's something we can watch out for people who have already read your first book. Any of our English teachers who would like to give that a read when it comes out. So the last question that I ask it to all my guests, and it's quite a large question. So take it in whichever direction you want to take it. What is a dream that you have for education?
So, I mean, I'll go with kind of the theme of this, which is that, like, you know, in the book and here, I talked about, you know, how teachers will often approach feedback and assessment as like a detached authority, as an editor, as opposed to an interested reader. And I think that could be expanded more broadly, that we often approach education as sort of detached authorities. Here are the things you need to learn because you need to learn them because they're in this book, you know, that's wrong, that's right. It's not that the knowledge is incredibly important. Those things in those books, those are very important too. But I think having this idea of an interested reader where you're like, okay, how can I help to motivate you? How can I help to make this joyful? How can I help to, regardless of who you are, help you to figure out how to make that information meaningful and stick, and get to, you know, and I think that's something that I'm always excited about, is just sort of like, you know, finding a way to be curious and interested and like listening to them, and using that information to help this process, of them sort of learning about the world, learning about themselves, and being ready to go out into it.
What a wonderful dream to have. Well, thank you so much again, Matt, for your time with us today. This was an awesome conversation, and I think there's going to be a lot of great response to this episode.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Stereotype threat. It's that looming risk of conforming to negative stereotypes about our social groups, and it's impacting our students' potential in profound ways. As educators, it's vital to recognize this phenomenon. See, stereotype threat can significantly hinder a student's performance, their engagement, and ultimately their success. So how do we address this? One key strategy lies in fostering a growth mindset. We need to instill in our students the belief that their abilities can grow through effort and dedication. This dismantles the belief that skills are fixed according to stereotypes. But it doesn't stop there. Diversifying our teaching materials and examples is fundamental. Including diverse voices and perspectives in our lessons makes every student feel valued and represented. By providing opportunities for our students to showcase their unique talents, we can empower them to defy the stereotypes. Creating an inclusive and supportive classroom environment is absolutely paramount. Affirming students' abilities, giving constructive feedback, and avoiding situations that inadvertently highlight stereotypes can make a significant difference. Educating students about stereotype threat itself is empowering. When they understand it, they can better navigate and mitigate its effects. Implementing these strategies isn't always easy. That's where training and professional development come in. Schools must offer workshops and resources for educators, equipping teachers with tools to understand and counter stereotype threat is essential. Collaboration among educators to share successful practices is key to creating an environment where every student feels supported and capable. Remember, it's about creating an environment where every student has the opportunity to flourish. With these techniques in hand, we, as educators, have the power to build a classroom where all students can achieve their full potential.
Digital portfolios in the classroom, showcasing and assessing student work. Matt Renwick's Digital Portfolios in the Classroom, Showcasing and Assessing Student Work offers a compelling and practical guide for educators seeking to leverage technology in a more meaningful way to showcase and assess student learning. Renwick's work not only demystifies the process of creating digital portfolios, but also emphasizes their profound impact on student engagement and assessment practices. Renwick begins by elucidating the purpose and potential of digital portfolios. He convincingly argues that they are not just a showcase of student work, but a dynamic tool for students to reflect on their learning journey. This transformative perspective sets the tone for the rest of the book, making it clear that digital portfolios are not just a technological trend, but a pedagogical approach with the potential to revolutionize the learning experience. One of the book's strengths is its practicality. Renwick doesn't just dwell on theory, he provides step-by-step guidance on how to implement digital portfolios effectively. From choosing the right tools to integrating them seamlessly into the curriculum, his suggestions are clear, they're actionable, and considerate of teachers' diverse contexts. Renwick also addresses the vital aspects of assessment. He explores how digital portfolios can move beyond being mere displays of achievement to becoming a more robust assessment tool. By providing examples and case studies, he demonstrates how educators can use digital portfolios to authentically assess student growth, their understanding, and skill development. Moreover, the book embraces the notion of student agency. Renwick argues that digital portfolios empower students to take ownership of their learning and provide them with a platform to articulate their progress and achievements. This student-centered approach aligns well with contemporary educational philosophies that emphasize personalized learning and student voice. Renwick's work is particularly timely in the context of the digital age. As technology becomes increasingly prevalent in education, the need for thoughtful integration and purposeful use is paramount. Digital portfolios in the classroom serves as a beacon for teachers navigating this landscape, offering them a roadmap to harness the potential of digital tools in a way that enhances rather than replaces effective teaching practices.
As we wrap up today's agenda, we want to express our heartfelt gratitude again to Matthew Johnson for sharing his expertise around feedback and creating an assessment-ready classroom. And also to you, our dedicated listeners. Please stay connected with us on Instagram at ECSD Learning, and don't forget to subscribe for updates on future episodes. We hope that today's episode has sparked inspiration for meaningful connections in education and encouraged a thoughtful approach to assessment practices. As you continue your journey of growth, may you find fulfillment and impactful connections. Thank you for listening to the Learning Curve podcast with Edmonton Catholic Schools.